Here's to you, Jimmy Durante, and happy birthday, my precious snowflakes born of unholy cryomancy. Welcome to Horror Convos. I'm your host, Keith Harris, and no, you have not developed sudden dyslexia and misread your calendar. December is not upon us just yet. But in my heart, the spirit is alive and well all year round. You can ask my old coworkers who got me fired from my last job for tattletaling about how apparently, quote-unquote, annoying it was that a very reasonable condition of my employment was listening to my trusty Christmas playlist for at least 1 hour on Alexa every day. It was my shift at the store. That was the agreement. I cleared it with my manager.
Bah, humbug!
Currently, I'm still in the middle of a lawsuit using the old tried-and-true legal shield of religious discrimination.
Cool, I'm a Lutheran.
Horror Convos is a casual, relaxing, and occasionally funny podcast where we choose one topic per episode and discuss horror media related to it. I then give my own personal history, thoughts, and opinions on that subject, including examples that portray it with high quality versus lower quality. I often have guests join in the conversation, and we hold regular polls for you to vote on what topic is covered in our Patreon exclusive For the Fans episodes. If you're not a fan of ads, you can enjoy the full podcast ad-free on Patreon along with other exclusive content. Horror Convos is available to listen to on YouTube, Google Podcast, and Apple Podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, and put a crack in that notification bell like the old Liberty so you never find yourself feeling left out at the water cooler when people are conversating about the newest uploaded content. Today's episode marks the maiden voyage for a new topic that I plan to make a recurring thing: horror classics that deserve a remake. Or reboot, reimagining, re-adaptation. We'll just use remake as a catch-all label. It's less of a mouthful that way. These episodes focus on a singular work of horror, be it an obscure story most people haven't heard of, or a diamond in the rough with a cult following that I believe could benefit from a quality modern retelling. It may be as simple as a new coat of technological paint or a full-blown rewrite with only the core concept retained. But like just about any horror fan, I'm sure you've experienced at least one piece of media in your life that made you think, man, if only this story had gotten a better shot, more of a budget, better writing in certain areas, had come out at a different time, etc. I mean, I could definitely name you at least 10 prime horror candidates chock full of potential and practically gift-wrapped for a remake off the top of my head right now. You know, even in a tired haze, if you woke me up to ask in the middle of the night, I could still give you like 3 to 5. But to keep this podcast at a reasonable length, my writer and editor being unreliable enough as it is, we'll stick to just one example per episode with this topic. As those of you who grew up on straight-to-VHS horror no doubt already gleaned from the opening ditty, today's underrated gem is a little-known Christmas sci-fi comedy slasher from the late 90s, Jack Frost. For those of you who may be unfamiliar, I will play some audio from the trailer. This will be my first time hearing it after the edit, so all you pre-existing fans can enjoy the nostalgia with me, and play.
When you play that, no matter where I am, I can hear it.
Sometimes a promise can take on a life of its own.
I'm home.
Dad's the Snowman.
Hey, yo, Wilhelm? Wilhelm? Yeah, come here a sec. What did I specifically tell you no less than 4 times? Yeah, you can listen. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, what does that sound like? Yeah. Yeah, I believe my exact words were not the fucking Michael Keaton version. It is just impossible to get good help these days, I swear, fucking Gen Alphas. This is future Keith here, disregard what sounded like a shotgun blast, not that I would know the difference between how any firearm sounds. My editor was just playing, it's all good, no 911 calls necessary. Isn't that right, pal? Yeah, we're good. Thanks, Will.
Oh, brother!
And now before this cheap shtick drives the rest of you to click off, here's the correct trailer. Fucking moron.
One cold night,
Science and evil collide. Oh yeah. Now, a serial killer is on the loose.
We hadn't even tested the acid on an amoeba, let alone a human cell. This is a disaster.
Look, I just saw something that doesn't belong in this world, and it's out there killing my friends. Now tell me what it is.
Jack Frost.
I think Jack's about to make an entrance. And he's giving Cold-Blooded a whole new meaning. Hell has just frozen over. Blow me. Jack Frost.
Granted, in hindsight, these two movies did come out a year apart. They're both about a man in a wintry town who dies in a snowstorm-related road accident before resurrecting as a creepy-ass snowman with superpowers brought to life by hilariously aged effects. Though in the 1997 film's case, the effects came out of the womb aged like a cinematic Benjamin Button. And I would have thrown that shit on someone else's doorstep too, no offense.
Oh, come on, it's just a joke. Still.
So both stories center around a family with a young boy, both involve a cop character, both snowmen are vulnerable to heat, guilty of stalking children, yada yada. I guess it's possible to mix them up if, you were a dumb shit kid or high off their ass adult, skimming the shelves of video rental stores and somehow didn't get the hint from the genuinely creepy lenticular VHS cover featuring a friendly snowman face change into a fucking monster. Yeah, seriously, it was like watching Tim Curry's clown face reveal those yellow eyes and fangs in Stephen King's It miniseries. Like, I remember being fascinated by this poster cover for years, looking at it every time I saw it at Blockbuster and Hollywood Video. I would have been around 6 to 7 years old at the time. I think that might have been my introduction to lenticular images. I mean, I didn't know how it worked back then, of course. I thought it was a magic trick or something. Point being, never once, even after the Michael Keaton film came out, did I ever even for a moment confuse the two. I mean, I know people who've worked in rental stores can likely attest to customers' low attention span, but to think that anyone actually let their kids watch this? I mean, the only explanation for that I can think of is that, some jackasses were deliberately switching the tapes out of the cover, which I can't admit, at the age I was back then, I might have been one of those jackasses had I been aware that was going on. I just wonder, were these people selectively fucking blind? The snowmen don't even look anything alike aside from both being white. One of them was a guy in a foam rubber suit. God, this isn't even like confusing someone you meet on the street for an actor. Do all snow people just look alike to these people?
Racist.
I guess the more you think about it, they are both essentially horror stories. I mean, Warner Brothers could dress it up with all the wholesome music and comedic moments they wanted. A family picture. Yeah, that's right, Doug and Rob Walker. I too can do a semi-decent Ralph Bakshi impression. But hey, when you strip it down to what actually happens in the plot without anything to color the tone, there's little to nothing really family-friendly about the Michael Keaton film either. I mean, think about it.
Uh-oh.
Incoming rant.
Alert.
Incoming rant.
Alert, class.
Okay, hear me out. A boy loses his already neglectful father, right, whom he loved so much, then he's further traumatized when his magical, or more accurately, cursed harmonica forces his dad's soul back from wherever it was in the afterlife, possibly hell, into the fragile, not at all practical vessel of a snowman. Sure, maybe they could have written his soul to possess an actual human temporarily, just so Jack could reconnect with his boy without worrying about the near-constant threat of the elements, plus losing pieces of himself every other scene. But then you'd run into issues of consent, like with Wonder Woman 1984. Hey, gotta have that goofy body humor to complement the already uncanny valley shit going on with that CGI snowman face. Then there's all the hilarious antics while reconnecting with his dead, which I guarantee you led so many children back then who were too young to know any better to pray and play with Ouija boards, wish upon stars, and offer their own soul to Satan, wishing desperately that they could summon the spirit of their departed loved ones against their will, only to be emotionally crushed by cruel reality. And how does it all wrap up in this tearjerker of a little bow? The fucker goes and dies again, leaving his son and now his wife looking all sad, but also happy, like they have this much-needed closure to move on and hold him in their hearts fondly, when in a world where these characters acted remotely like people generally function in real life, they'd be traumatized again several times over. Like, dude, that poor mom would go insane after that. She'd struggle so much more to move forward with her life and find a healthy relationship ever again. That kid would end up in a fucking mental institution after all that shit, evaluated by psychologists, psychiatrists, and pumped full of drugs he may very well need until he's convinced the whole thing was a self-concocted fantasy to cope with loss, like the brother out of Oculus.
You want to get nuts? Come on, let's get nuts.
Yeah, and if his mom decides to go with that narrative, meaning her son now treats that whole ordeal as a delusion, she'd likely be that much more heartbroken, feeling like it was all kind of meaningless. It would feel like some cosmic joke, leaving her with deeper wounds than she ever would have had from just losing her husband in a car accident. You know, at least that's easier to digest with a basic understanding of reality. Good luck comprehending what that is after this. You know, she'll likely turn to alcohol or some other substance abuse to keep herself from snapping. You know, what a stable mother she'd be to her son after that.
That's a lot of nuts!
You know, dude, how often do parents get the shaft in stories like this because of their kids' bullshit? Honestly, you could rip apart countless children's movies like this. I'm not doing this just to be funny or cynical. I had fun with this movie at points as a kid. I cried at the ending too. But even on paper, as soon as you start to use your basic rational functions, I would have loved to be a fly on the wall in the writer's room with probably several people immediately realizing this is a horrible, tragic story. Like, this whole thing on its face. Like, I would have crushed that harmonica, set the pieces on fire, and chucked whatever was left in the nearest river if that happened to me. I don't care if my Keaton dad's talking to me through the Snowman. That's fucking nightmare fuel. Am I wrong? Tell me in the comments, please. Okay, where was I? Killer Snowman, no more tangents. I'll come back to the other Jack Frost maybe in a future childhood trauma or unintentional horror episode. Okay, back on track. So, 1997's Jack Frost was the directorial debut of Michael Cooney, whose family was rooted in theater. He had a tough journey entering the film business. Very few credits to his name, unfortunately, from what I've found. But he has made his mark in some projects. He wrote the screenplay for 2003's Identity, very well done psychological mystery thriller, as well as 2010's Shelter, which was titled Six Souls in its US release. But The Killer Snowman will likely always be what he's best known for, and according to him, he has no problem with that. He's very appreciative and has seemingly always been gracious toward his fans. He enjoys talking about Jack Frost in interviews. If you want to listen to a quality interview, I'd recommend the one from the YouTube channel Miscast Commentary, hosted by Joe Findley and Todd Murray. That one, he shares detailed background on himself, his family, career, colleagues, creative process, and of course, Jack Frost. So the film begins with Uncle Henry, voiced by Cooney, telling a, quote, happy, scary Christmas story to his niece, voiced by former soap opera star Marcia Clark, who is a totally real child here.
Uncle Henry, tell me a story.
No, it's late. Go to bed. Santa will be here soon.
No, I want a story. Please.
All right, all right.
Yeah, imagine listening to 2 minutes and 54.5 seconds of that. You're damn right I clocked it. Uncle Henry sets the stage on the night of a thick snowstorm on an isolated mountain road where we find our titular killer, played by Dexter's Officer Gerard and Star Trek Enterprise's Commander Dolam himself, Scott McDonald, being driven to his scheduled execution after a cross-country reign of terror.
Deep fried Jack served at midnight!
Even in handcuffs under armed guard, though, it's made clear right away how dangerous Jack is as he kills the guard watching him unbeknownst to the two up front.
Harv? Harv? Everything okay back there, Harv?
Oh, you're doing fine.
Whew.
Real fine.
How did Jack overpower Harv so quickly without the guards up front hearing anything? How did he fool them with that god-awful impression? Why did the one in the passenger seat not just quickly check the back of the truck?
'Cause fuck 'em, that's why.
When the prisoner transport's driver fails to see a conveniently incoming tanker truck, Jack thinks it's his lucky day and escapes the ensuing crash without a scratch, despite the vehicle rolling enough times to make you think this movie's camera was taken over by Evil Dead's first-person demon.
Do a barrel roll.
Definitely not the first one to make that joke. Fun fact, Michael Cooney did take direct inspiration from one of his favorite filmmakers, Sam Raimi, for this spinning camera shot. To look forward to more trivia about the film later this episode. Jack shakes off the crash faster than Vin Diesel, only to suddenly be drenched in an as-yet unknown acidic chemical when the other truck's tank breaks open.
This is gonna hurt.
Honestly, I love Scott's delivery of that line. It's like a precursor to Norman Osborn's equally deadpan delivery in 2002 Spider-Man when Green Goblin takes the glider to his junk.
Oh.
How did the tank not bust during those double digits of barrel rolls? Just don't think about it. More conveniently, however, it turns out that this particular truck happens to be carrying a chromosomal bonding solution from top classified experiments in genetic research going on at an even more conveniently located nearby government base, transformed on a molecular level in a charming animated sequence reminiscent of Jurassic Park.
Bingo. Dino DNA.
Jack's melted flesh bonds with the snow he falls into, and he rises as a whole new kind of life form.
World's most pissed off snow cone.
Yeah, he's basically Iceman from the X-Men if you mixed him with an evil Deadpool.
Yeah, whoa! Relax. Whoa! Okay. I think that's a good start. This motherfucker!
With his consciousness, memories, and bloodlust all miraculously intact, just don't think about it, he now resides in a hive mind composed of trillions of tiny sentient ice crystals whose shape, form, mass, and density he can change at will. From snow to solid ice and even water, he's been given what could be something resembling near immortality. And how does it feel?
Oh, it feels...
And just when you thought it couldn't get even more convenient, this all just happens to occur in the exact county near the town where he was caught years ago by the resident sheriff Sam Tyler, played by the late Chris Alport. Those of you who grew up in the 70s might be more familiar with him. I personally don't remember seeing him in anything before these movies. His earliest breakout role was in the short-lived soap opera Another World, but he was involved in some big stuff. He was among the actors originally considered for Han Solo, and actually did a screen test with Amy Irving, who was reading at the time for Princess Leia. He's appeared in a few things, The X-Files, ER, Quantum Leap, Mad Men.
Go watch it!
He's one of those veteran character actors that, you may recognize his face, but not recall where from, or you might mix him up with someone else. Scott McDonald's actually been in that boat himself, I think. Yeah, Chris died young, though, in January 2008. In an eerie coincidence, he was killed by snow, one of 3 victims in an avalanche, at the Mountain High Ski Resort in Wrightwood, California, and Michael Cooney says he first got the idea for Jack Frost at a cabin where it was snowing. I swear, this reminds me of how I felt when I first learned Prince was found dead in an elevator shaft. But for his time, Chris was the biggest name in the cast, which was Cooney's intent. He got as many actors as he could from B-movies and TV, but needed a protagonist with some star power to lend the film name recognition. Unlike a lot of cop protagonists, though, Sam starts out kind of timid. An unimpressive, albeit more handsome Barney Fife, no offense to the legendary Don Knotts. He just happened to catch Jack off guard in the right place at the right time when his getaway car broke down. It is established to be the first time Jack, this usually cunning killer, made a big mistake. He underestimated this kind of milquetoast country sheriff. This same mistake comes back to bite him again in the finale. This garners Sam unwanted publicity as a local hero cop, especially from his young son Ryan and darling wife Anne, played by fellow Star Trek royalty, The Next Generation's Eileen Seeley. Only Sam and Jack know the whole truth, that he is far from worthy of being put on a pedestal with the likes of Martin Riggs or John McClane. Granted, he tries, as his character does find more courage and confidence by the third act with his, let's say, clever one-liners.
Hey, Jack! What? What's the difference between Snowman and Snow Women? No balls.
And in fairness, that one technically came from Ryan first, but hey, that pales in comparison to the bazinga-spewing machine old Jackie is.
Sorted, here's the wind-up and the...
It's a long drive!
And yes, a lot of those were improvised. Every other minute of screen time he's in, this character just can't go without saying something he had loaded up that would make the writers of Batman and Robin's dialogue think to themselves.
All right, everyone, chill.
I invented chill!
Bloody hijinks ensue as Jack takes advantage of his newfound abilities by returning to the unsuspecting town, who, I swear to God, are taking convenience up to the exosphere by preparing for their annual Snowman contest around the exact time he appears. As the welcome sign says, it's the snowman capital of the world, apparently. Hey, good thing that acid turned him into the exact thing the town's known for, right? So he'd have the perfect disguise and not be shot on sight the moment he's recognized. I swear, this is the most convenient timing for a monster movie, since the shark in Jaws happen to be attracted to swimmers around the start of the busiest time of year, when Amity happens to be gearing up for their summer tourism. Imagine that film as a short story where Bruce swims through there in the dead of winter and gets so starved that he just fucks off to another island. The townsfolk are none the wiser, believing Jack to be just another snowman, which serves the psycho perfectly as he sets his plan in motion to take revenge on Sam as he promised he would, with bodies piling up one by one under increasingly inexplicable causes of death. The frightened sheriff suspects Jack may be the culprit despite having no proof or ammo to go on, and reluctantly teams up with a steely-eyed Fed known only as Agent Manners, and the scientist behind the acid experiments who've been tracking the strange occurrences since the crash. Ultimately, Sam must once again confront the killer Frost.
No relation.
And become the hero people believed he already was before Jack wipes out his little town, including Ryan and Anne.
Take a good long look at this face, because the next time you see it, it's gonna tear your world apart. I'll find a way. I'll tear your town apart. I'll kill your family. I'll kill you. You're dead.
So, evidently, for all his power and how relentlessly difficult he is to put down, Jack's new body does have three main vulnerabilities. A, sufficiently high temperatures, which Sam and others use to hold him off with hair dryers. Why does this harm Jack at all when the film shows him turn himself into liquid and back to solid multiple times like a T-1000? Just don't think about it. B, a banana allergy, which Jack gets from Sam's DNA in the sequel.
What?
Yeah, we'll get to that. Trust me. C. Antifreeze, which is used to trap Jack in a liquid state where his icy cells can no longer bond to reform. Sure, we could go into why this isn't exactly how antifreeze works, but I'm not Kyle Hill. And guess where Sam got this idea? His son, who, I shit you not, mixed antifreeze into the oatmeal he made for his dad's lunch because he didn't want him to get cold. And although Ryan's age isn't specified, this little shit was played by Zach Edgington.
Flawless pronunciation.
Who was 10 to 11 at the time of filming. Another fun fact, he's also credited for providing additional voices in The Iron Giant. Which voices exactly, don't know. What mentally stable, basic sense possessing 10, let alone 11-year-old have you ever met that wouldn't know antifreeze is not good to ingest? I don't know if Ryan was written in an earlier draft of the script to have been born with an extra chromosome or 2 or 10, and the final draft just forgot to edit that detail out, but if he's not supposed to be portrayed that way, and the writers just honestly gave so few shits that they didn't care to address this brain-dead decision that the kid never gets called out on, by the way, faces no consequences for it. In this film, at least. That should tell you something about the quality of screenplay this long, sad project ended up with. I mean, you may as well have had him mix in rat poison and have that turn out to be Jack's weakness for whatever reason. And a double twist reveal that Sam was actually an abusive alcoholic father this whole time, so he and Jack are both assholes. They can both die together, with Ryan and his mom being the only survivors. That would make a lot more sense, and a 10-year-old could have written that. If even for a low-budget direct-to-video film, like, how did nobody look at this and just don't think? Oh, I'm sick of not thinking, okay? If I think any less, I'll be a vegetable. Even for a turn-your-brain-off comedy, this is... You know, what is the punchline here? The film doesn't poke fun at that, or set it up for a laugh as far as I can tell. Sam treats it like this eureka moment, like his son's some accidental friggin' genius. This guy, imagine if Sam had swallowed one good-sized bite of that. His wife would have resented their son so hard for the rest of her life. I don't care how many times she tells him, it was an accident, honey, you didn't know. No, part of her would definitely wish it had been him instead of Sam. Don't even try to tell me no parent would ever think about their kid that way after a fuck-up that huge. Yeah, you might think it sounds like I'm being too harsh or, like, politically non-correct or whatever, but am I really? Like, just... It's antifreeze! It clearly says on the bottle, anywhere you buy it from, something to the effect of, hey, you, yes, you, do not eat or drink me. And we can't blame dyslexia on this either, because Ryan says out loud what it was, thereby establishing he can most likely fucking read. Okay, whatever. We haven't even gotten to the dumbest stuff yet by a wide margin, if you can believe that. And if I go over everything in this film that makes no sense, even by its own logic, this podcast will set a Guinness record. So with every past attempt to destroy the Snowman having failed, his powers growing, and FBI agent Manners out of commission, Jack chases Sam into the church for their climactic face-off. Get the fuck out of here, Nick Cage. I do not owe you royalties for that. Are restraining orders ever not useless with celebrities, I swear? And just when it looks like the sheriff's done for, he finally steps up for his heroic moment, taking Jack and himself through a second-story window and falling into the back of a pickup truck parked below them, filled with antifreeze. Only one foam rubber arm from the Snowman remains, which Ryan picks up, because of course he does. It tries to strangle him in one last attempt at natural selection, but as Uncle Henry narrated, per his niece's request, this is a happy, scary story. Hence, the hero's dumbass kid has to live. It's the loss. So Sam saves Ryan and melts the arm, leaving every bit of Jack now trapped in antifreeze. How is Sam not at minimum paralyzed after falling from that height into a metal truck bed with only a snowman and a few inches of liquid to break his fall? How does Sam and Ryan take this chemical bath, getting it in their eyes, nose, mouth, and open wounds with no adverse effects at all?
Just don't think of
it. Yeah, it's becoming the fucking theme this episode. So Sam's alive, family's alive, town's safe, the entire pool of antifreeze containing Jack is bottled and buried, and even after that litany of noxious fertilizer, someone was just dead inside enough to greenlight, this ending still has the audacity to sequel bait with the jugs of antifreeze shaking underground, implying Jack still has enough power to move and might one day escape. And we'll just gloss over how that fundamentally breaks the film's own lore when the molecules that held him together are now separated by the antifreeze, which should mean that... The tone of this movie is, it's basically Killer Clowns from Outer Space or Army of Darkness if you tried to do it with a lot less money and shooting time. If you like those two movies, you can get a group of friends together, maybe have a few drinks and just laugh at this movie. It's not something you have to hate watch. That's unhealthy. Just go in with the appropriate expectations. Okay, so now we come to probably one of the most unlikely sequels in horror history since Troll 2. Jack Frost 2, Revenge of the Mutant Killer Snowman. I so wish they'd added teenage to that title, just to screw with marketing. I think it's dumber, goofier, cheaper looking, not as funny to many fans, and somehow so much less coherent that I think it should be used as an aid in college courses to teach aspiring filmmakers everything not to do. This 3-course meal of yellow snow hit rental shelves in November of 2000. If you needed more proof that Y2K would have been a merciful end for humanity, here it is. Picking up 1 year after the original, we find old Sheriff Friendly and his wife taking a much-needed vacation to the Bahamas. Sam's been in therapy dealing with PTSD from the events of last Christmas, on top of them both mourning their son Ryan after he died from accidentally eating antifreeze oatmeal. And my faith in humanity's restored a little bit. That's one point I can give this film over its predecessor right out of the gate. And I swear to you, on my non-chemical soul, that is the on-screen explanation for the kid's absence. Their tropical escapism is cut short, however, when, surprise, scientists playing with shit they don't understand set the conflict in motion again. Do not take a shot every time that happens in fiction. You will die before you even get close to the 21st century. Jack is dug up by a new team of curious Georges who want to steady him in a lab until one of them accidentally spills their cocoa into his tank, where the hot beverage and antifreeze mix into ice.
Of course!
Jack's sentient molecules have a mental connection to know where Sam is now because a little of his DNA mixed into Jack's when Sam's blood from an open wound got into the antifreeze he was trapped in at the end of the original film. This extra DNA apparently also makes Jack more powerful, as he can now reform as a snowman in tropical weather, is resistant to antifreeze, can produce snow eggs that hatch into little mini Jack snowball gremlins that are straight up immune to physical damage, antifreeze, or heat. They can survive blenders and waffle irons like it's nothing. The film does these effects with CGI that makes Michael Keaton's Jack Frost look like Avatar. It's hilarious. Jack can straight up trap people inside his snowman body now and wear them like a meat suit. He gets so OP that he can control the weather and make it snow over the island. And in the end, it's revealed that with Sam's DNA also came his banana allergy. So the characters use that to kill the mini-Jacks. Sam overcomes his PTSD at last and blows Jack up with a banana attached to an arrow.
You okay, Vegeta?
Yes, just
Just an aneurysm out of sheer stupidity.
Wow! Didn't think you were that stupid, Vegeta.
Team 4-star is the shit! All jokes and bashing aside, these movies do have a little endearing quality to them if you take them for what they are. I don't own them and will definitely not rewatch them every year around Christmas. They're an absolute chore to sit through if you're like me and prefer stories where you can actually use your brain to some extent. But from a production standpoint, I can appreciate them. Cooney knew what they were and made the best of it. A number of people in the cast and crew clearly had fun. Scott McDonald looks and sounds like he had a blast, even if most of his performance was voice work. I can respect any piece of media that, at the very least, the creators and co-workers had an overall positive experience with, because at its best, ideally, isn't that part of the point of making entertainment? I've always believed that entertainment benefits when the entertainers enjoy their work. You can just tell, you sense it, or you're just a terrible judge of character. I've been wrong before, but I don't think I am on this one. Beneath all the silliness, lowest common denominator humor, and cringy dialogue, that there is something unironically scary, in my opinion, about the idea of a sentient snowman that can shapeshift, control the elements, and use the elements which created it to go on a killing spree. It's very much, I think, almost exactly the same appeal as Child's Play. Serial killer is about to die, changes into something that's meant to be wholesome, innocent, and child-friendly, pretends to be that thing while the people are none the wiser, then ambushes his victims and us, the audience, revealing the evil inside. It's the classic archetype of corrupting something made to inspire joy and maybe a sense of safety and security for some. I mean, everyone who's made a snowman at least once remembers how much fun it could be. It was a workout stacking those snow boulders into position with the head on top, depending on how big and tall you wanted it to be. But there is an almost universally relatable catharsis to building this thing in the image of your own imagination that can represent anything you want it to be in your own mind. It's your friend, your snow child, something to watch over your property like a wintry guardian angel you can wake up to every day until that inevitable bittersweet farewell as it gets warmer. Kids during the Great Depression could still have fun in the snow together when their hands and feet weren't crippled by frostbite, of course.
Do you want to build a snowman?
It's just one of the most beautiful wonders of nature, snow. It's the same basic psychology, I would guess, as why we enjoy sandcastles, Legos, or knitting. It's the simple freedom and potentially kind of a god complex that comes with the ability to create, the act of creation. And you could anthropomorphize it as Mother Nature's way of playing with us and offering us natural resources to play with her. It's one of the most timeless, primal forms of human entertainment that probably every culture exposed to snow can relate to, as primal as music or dancing. And the horror here is, of course, reminiscent of Frankenstein. Man wants to play God, creates monster, monster kills man. It's the equally timeless cautionary tale of...
Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
And if you look at the history of snow-related horror, which is obviously a niche premise usually found within the larger subgenre of Christmas horror, I mean, plenty of films take place during snow, but very few successfully make the snow and ice itself scary. It's always been kind of lesser utilized in fiction that capitalizes on horror of the elements. So you can find a minority of films involving body horror, from hypothermia and again, frostbite, of course, but there is something to be said for the sort of inherent uncanny nature of snow people. Well, I've certainly made a snowman or woman at least once that unintentionally turned out kind of creepy looking. There are very few times, though, where the image of snow people genuinely scared me in fiction. The earliest example, I guess, would be Christmas with the Cranks, maybe? Yeah, I know. The evil face Frosty makes when his eyes light up while Tim Allen's placing him on the roof, and then later when he and Jamie Lee Curtis are hiding in their basement with them, those two parts actually kind of stuck with me as a kid. I know it wasn't meant to be that scary, it's a comedy, but they did a little too good of a job with making Frosty look possessed in those scenes, and it works to the advantage of his normally docile expression when his eyes change, because the fact that he doesn't move makes it creepier. You can't tell what he's thinking or what he might do, apart from whatever his expression conveys, which is usually pretty mannequin. And it's again like the weeping angels from Doctor Who. I believe I've mentioned them before. Second example would be 2015's Krampus, another low-budget Christmas horror flick, but it still had a hell of a lot more production value. Jack Frost makes it look like a holiday blockbuster, but the story's mechanic of having each of Krampus's victims replaced with creepy snow people who look like them, that I really liked. I would definitely capitalize on a similar running theme for a Jack Frost remake. Apart from that, the most recent example would probably be 2017's thoroughly disappointing Michael Fassbender murder mystery crime thriller, The Snowman. Dude, I remember being so intrigued by the trailer for that film. It was marketed in a way that made it look much scarier than what the final product gave us. I think I convinced my dad to take me to see it in theaters, and we walked out agreeing that it was kind of a snore, and not necessarily poorly done, just disappointingly average, not very creative, very predictable. The best kills were in the trailer, of course, specifically two kills, one being a woman's head found on a snowman body, and the other an inverse of that, a man's decapitated body with a snowman head. If you look at the cover poster, it's still a legitimately creepy image, but the biggest compliment I can give the movie itself is it had some beautiful cinematography. The wide shots of the snow, ice, and mountains at different times of day were some breathtaking scenery. But yeah, even for a film that was only about a serial killer incorporating snowmen into his MO, that's the only other time I've been unsettled by the image of a snow person, and that sucks, because like I said, with more money and a better script, Jack Frost could have succeeded at that. It didn't have to be a cheap-looking, self-aware goofball comedy with barely any attempts at actual horror. Cooney only went that route because he was cornered into it when he realized everything looked so cheap, there was just no way to play it straight. But under the circumstances, I still respect how he managed to get the first film done at all. It's just a lot of untapped potential for the concept, and it goes hand in hand with the mythology of Jack Frost. I mean, the name alone is enough. That character's been adapted in a variety of ways, ranging from children's stories like the classic Rankin Bass holiday specials to more villainous like Martin Short in the Santa Claus 3, and the more popular version with Gen Z, Chris Pine's a mischievous heartthrob from the animated film adaptation of Rise of the Guardians, who teenage girls, fanfic writers, and certain artists just can't stop shipping with Elsa.
Fuck it up, fuck it up, don't give a shit anymore.
Again, if you grew up in the 90s through the 2000s, straight-to-video horror gave us some of the unapologetically dumbest fun you can imagine, from Ginger Snaps to the Dentist films, Ice Cream Man, Thanksgiving, several Leprechaun sequels, and so many others, far too many to go over here. This was the peak of an era that produced a lot of bare-bones, budget home entertainment productions. Pretty much no reputable studio or creator typically wanted their name attached to. One main reason I think so many of these often deliberately tongue-in-cheek projects didn't get a theatrical run, despite the fact that plenty of schlock horror in the past has made the cut for the big screen,
Evil Dead,
it is specifically because, more so in the 90s, this was a time when horror as a genre, particularly slashers, they were still often looked down upon by many in Hollywood. Most everyone knows by now that the industry and especially the Academy have always been biased against horror to some degree. It's no accident that so few horror flicks even today ever get nominated for, let alone win Oscars. Perfect recent example would be how Toni Collette was robbed after her performance in Hereditary. She'd long since proven over a decades-long career that she could act with the best of them, and many people today know her directly because of that movie. So, 2 plus 2 is 4. I would respectfully argue, however, that this isn't entirely the fault of political film snob elitism. If we're being completely brutally transparent, the 80s slasher craze was really a double-edged sword for horror's growing reputation at the time, but partially because of the increasingly derivative and at times just blatantly low-effort cash grab exploitation sequels and knockoffs of better-known, better-performing movies. My friend David Day from Horror Movie Talk wrote a blog about this years ago about how slashers negatively impacted horror movies for a while. I couldn't begin to tell you the number of Friday the 13th ripoffs that emerged over just the first 2 decades alone after the original debuted in 1980, and really exploded into mainstream with parts 2 through 4 once Jason entered the spotlight. That's not even getting into the conveyor belt of Nightmare on Elm Street sequels that were churning out. Halloween stayed dormant for a while after Season of the Witch underperformed. Carpenter wanted to move on after that to do other things. Halloween 4, as I said in the last episode, was the first attempt to kind of reboot the series, and that wasn't until 1994, I believe. It was just a very competitive, experimental, overall crowded market at the time for this monster of a new horror craze that I think a number of studios just didn't want to associate with. And the 90s, and to a lesser extent the 2000s as well, were a direct consequence of that. Many directors, writers, and many critics like Siskel and Ebert gave scathing reviews on a number of movies like this. And to their credit, in more than a few cases, I'd say they made some substantiated points. A lot of these more derivative sequels and not at all subtle knockoffs were just not quality movies from my assessment, and everybody involved knew that they weren't. I think they may have desired to do something more in early development. Of course, they didn't all set out to be a shoestring schlock with little to no ambition. Ambitious creators are very often the ones who sadly end up making these. From what I've researched, even at the bottom of the barrel, you'll find plenty of creative people who are or were ambitious in this industry. A lot of them often just have some tough breaks. They aren't given a chance to really prove themselves because the industry executives will ultimately never value creativity as much as profit. They're businessmen. They're in business, obviously, to make money. That's just reality. So many of these unfortunate directors, writers, and producers just get chewed up and spit out by the industry, which leaves them with little alternative but to settle for showing a lesser version of their ambitious ideas. They do what they can with what they have, get whatever marketing they can, they take the scraps they can get. Some of them, really prove to be underdog stories, and if they're really lucky, the right person will see their potential and give them a real chance with enough money to actually do something of higher merit. Again, I think the 90s and to an extent the 2000s straight-to-video horror market was really a consequence of the 80s oversaturation of cheap exploitation flicks. It was an attempt to kind of repeat the success of horror franchises from that time, essentially give it a renaissance through the VHS and DVD rental spaces. Many horror movies that bombed in theaters found their second life and later iconic status because of home video sales. Tremors, perfect example. And for many movies that never got exposure to theaters hoping to take advantage of this new growing market, or at the very least get their foot in the door so the creator's name would be out there, it just didn't work out that way. Almost every down-on-their-luck filmmaker thinks, they're gonna be the one to make it. Most everyone wants their rags to riches Cinderella story, but there just aren't that many glass slippers and feet to fit them. The times changed, audiences changed, the whole zeitgeist changed. There was still a place for these kinds of movies. I think there always will be in some capacity. The world around them just largely moved on from the 80s. The kids who were raised on that grew up. A number of them rewatched all this stuff they had nostalgia for and saw with their more adult eyes that, yeah, some of it was just kind of shit. I've had the same experience rewatching tons of stuff that I loved as a kid, which is, ironic considering that now in the past 20 years to date, 90s and especially 80s nostalgia is coming back in a big way, including for horror thanks to, Stranger Things, the new film duology of It, etc. It happens to everyone who lives long enough with media of any age range that we grew up on. It's the price we pay for developing critical thinking. If you compare it to television, we can interpret a number of these straight-to-video releases as the crappy pilots for sitcoms. The overwhelming majority of pilots are typically shit compared to what comes after. You can tell the director, writers, and cast haven't really found their groove yet, and in most cases they're doing what's more of a proof of concept short than anything meant to establish tone and continuity. So many of them don't get picked up. The ones that do almost always change several details, sometimes to a major degree for the first official episode. Like the first episode you see of almost every popular sitcom in history that in terms of what aired probably wasn't the actual real rough first filmed pilot. More likely it was the second or third version. Again, look at Evil Dead. Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell never could have anticipated that their little amateur, unintentional horror comedy, which began with that even cheaper-looking short film, Within the Woods, would become as big as it is today. Alright, before we get into ideas for how to remake Jack Frost, it's important to understand how the original ended up the way it did. If you want an entertaining YouTube video about the film's full history, watch the retrospective done by Leighton Eversole, or the fantastic Festive Facts trivia list by Groovy Movies. So, abridged history lesson here. Eric Cooney's talked about all of this in interviews and his director's commentary from when the film re-released on Blu-ray. The idea that would become Jack Frost goes back to when Cooney and a group of friends, one of whom brought their girlfriend, went to stay at his cabin in Big Bear, California. There was enough snow that he and his friends decided it would be funny to make an evil-looking snowman, and his friend's girlfriend saw it the next morning, said, "That fucking snowman outside the window was just staring at me," and the group thought you could make a horror movie of that. In terms of media inspiration, Cooney fleshed out the idea from two films, Wes Craven's Shocker and James Cameron's The Abyss, particularly from its digital effects with the water creature. He developed this premise of a serial killer with control over the elements who could change from fire to water and ice. He started shopping a spec script around as soon as 1990, had lengthy discussions with people he pitched it to about what he envisioned as an estimated $30 million theatrical film. He was already putting a team together, but he couldn't find a director who liked his script and did not want to do it himself when he had no prior experience in film. So he goes back to England, does his first play, which made his first decent payday. Then he takes whatever money he got, heads back to America to fund his own production office in 1993. Yeah, ballsy move. He got the attention of Prism Entertainment, a more established production company at the time, and took their offer to make the film for a fraction of his proposed budget. Technically, there's still no consensus on what the budget he got actually was. I don't know if the records for it still exist. Cooney said it totaled around $600,000. His cinematographer, Dean Lent, says it was closer to $1.5 million, which would be higher than the original Saw's budget, and that movie is Scorsese compared to this. Either way, it was basically junk change by both early 90s and current film budget standards. This fucking So Cooney had pretty much no alternative at this point than to direct the film himself, because nobody else would. He had to rethink all the ambitious stuff he'd imagined, trim it down to essentially a tenth of what it was in his mind, with only the bare bones of the elemental serial killer idea, which led to him revisiting the evil snowman concept from The Cabin and working it into a Christmas film to take advantage of holiday marketability. And he couldn't even do that very well, because they shot this thing in Fawnskin, California at the perfectly wrong time. This location was chosen specifically for its snowy scenery in winter. Cooney directed, co-wrote, and storyboarded this entire thing with a wintry setting in mind, and this was the first year in over 6 decades that Fawnskin would experience a winter drought with no snow. So they had to spend money for a shit ton of the cheapest looking fake snow while shooting under clear sunny skies, where you can see on camera with these actors wearing all these layers that it's so obviously warm out. Scott McDonald said that temperatures during shooting climbed from the 70s into the 80s, and Cooney couldn't wait until next winter or write another play to raise money for some big-ass snow fans. They had to shoot this entire thing in 18 days.
But wait! There's more!
And even before it came to that, Cooney had blown over a quarter of the budget on casting, which left only $50,000 for effects. They were supposed to have multiple snowmen to use for different types of scenes, and somehow Cooney still isn't exactly sure how. Maybe there was a legal error or miscommunication somewhere. Again, this was his first time directing a movie, but he basically got gypped. The effects team he paid only gave him one rubber suit. I don't even want to think about how it smelled by the time production wrapped.
I just threw up in here, people. That's the reality. Another layer to the legend. I am nothing but a human onion. In fact, we all are encore.
And after they finally managed to finish shooting in 1994, after years of Cooney facing setback after setback just to get some version of this story made, it didn't release for over 3 years. I swear, I can't help feeling bad for the guy in spite of some of the decisions he made. Like, literally, at just about every turn, this project was almost like a straight-to-video microcosm of the kind of shit Spielberg went through on Jaws. Just a thoroughly brutal production. Now let's address the carrot-nosed elephant in the room. The infamous bathroom scene with Shannon Elizabeth.
Looks like Christmas came a little early this year.
Yeah. So this was Shannon's debut film before her breakout roles in American Pie and Scary Movie, among others. I haven't been able to find earlier drafts of the Jack Frost script, and unless you can, feel free to comment if you can. And you kind of have to choose whether to take Cooney at his word on this. Otherwise, for purposes of the podcast, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. And in the script they used at the time during shooting, according to him, he says Shannon's character, Jill Metzner, was not supposed to be killed the way that it's portrayed. But when you watch it, even without any dialogue, it's a snowman repeatedly slamming a naked woman into a wall, and the carrot is not on his face. Cooney insists that the carrot was removed from the suit because it was poking Shannon in the eye, and I guess they just couldn't make it work at that angle. The shoot was already falling behind. They'd have been shooting all day. Cooney could see a crew member off to the side tapping their watch, so they ended up kind of stuck with that footage, I guess. They didn't have access to any digital effects to add the carrot nose back in, and CGI wouldn't become a part of this until the sequel. They'd already splurged for the bathroom, which was an above-ground set with a lift under it that Shannon and the suit were attached to. And as Cooney recounts, he and his editor Terry Kelly only meant for Jack to smash Jill's head against the wall until she died. It was Kelly who pointed out how it could be interpreted. I personally don't like the scene. I'm not condoning it, but realistically, if they had cut the whole sequence, that's not only a ton of money that would have been wasted, but it would have broken the plot, since Jill would have just disappeared from the story, and her death was built up from an early point as one of the film's major effect scenes. Sometimes in filmmaking, shit goes wrong, and you just don't have the time or resources to fix it. Could Cooney have thought up a different idea altogether earlier in development and production? Yes, absolutely, but you know, hindsight's 20/20. It's a textbook no-win scenario, is what this was. So yeah, that was when Cooney bit the bullet, I guess you could say, to just shoot a little extra footage of Jack confirming a sexual implication. And since people were going to see it that way no matter what, if the footage was used. To Shannon's credit, Cooney always praises how much he and the crew loved working with her, you know, in more than just a horny guys kind of way. She was a total trooper, and before the bathroom scene was recontextualized, Cooney was very careful when shooting to not show too much of her nude. Like, you see this in the scene, like, you know, impact speaks louder than intent, but it was originally his intent to be more tasteful of her image. Make of that what you will. Well, Cooney doesn't really defend it, though. He's made it clear several times, anytime it comes up, he would never do that scene today with or without the carrot. And that was that. 1997 rolled around, and the film looked like a dud until its VHS sales started booming overseas, such as in Japan. The famous lenticular cover was essential in drawing people to it, including in the U.S. Cooney never even imagined the Snowman looking like that. He attributes this to a, quote, young marketing guy whose name he says he never remembers that worked at another company called Apex, which would later become Unipix. So they were sold Jack Frost for peanuts after Prism went bankrupt. There's a whole story behind that in itself. So this nameless guy ends up in charge of marketing the movie. He thought, hey, I can sell this, and made something that's almost false advertising. It looks so much better than anything the actual film could do. Anyway, you know, it's the version of the Snowman pretty much everyone, you know, remembers. So from nostalgia, every blockbuster Cooney estimates had anywhere from 10 to 15 copies of the film. That cover is so rare. No modern copies of it were reproduced. He was gifted a poster-sized version of it. That original cover's become like a piece of horror memorabilia that I think sells online for a high price now. So the home video profit allowed Cooney to make the sequel, and here we are in 2023, still exploiting nostalgia about these films for likes and views.
If you want to watch a review of this that is just like, it'll make you cry laughing, at least it did for me, please check out Corey Coleman's review of Jack Frost at Double Toasted. Corey is, I followed him for years, one of the funniest guys on YouTube. Don't agree with all of his opinions about the things he talks about, whether it's movies or other things. He talks about a variety of stuff, but dude is consistently on point with making me laugh, just like nothing but net. All the years that I've watched him, and he's worked in the film business too. Anyway, he actually did a little of the animation then for the Michael Jordan Bugs Bunny classic Space Jam. The original one, you know, in my opinion, the good one. He knows his stuff when it comes to talking about movies, especially animation. Yeah, another interesting coincidence. Corey actually went to the same high school as Shannon Elizabeth. He says he was a grade ahead of her. They weren't really friends, like they talked a couple times, but he didn't know that she had become an actress until he recognized her in American Pie. Yeah, just a small world, huh? Alrighty, here are my humble suggestions step by step for how I would approach a hypothetical Jack Frost remake. I might bounce around to different points of the plot as we go. I'm not a screenwriter by any means, but I'll do my best not to make it infuriating to follow. I don't know who I would cast, except if Scott McDonald were up for it, I'd definitely keep him in the role of Jack, if not both as his human self and his voice as the snow creature, then at least the voice. He's only 64. He may not be in the same physical shape anymore, but there are a minority of serial killers in that age range in real life, so I think he'd still be believable in the role.
Whoever it is should be eccentric enough that they can balance being serious and scary with chewing scenery for what you'd expect in a horror comedy. For the ratio of horror and humor, don't go as dead serious as 2013's Evil Dead reboot did, where it just tried to be a straight horror all the way through. But don't go full Army of Darkness either. Arguably, even Evil Dead 2 might be pushing it a little bit. To try and find a balance of horror and levity, somewhere more between Evil Dead 2 and the original Evil Dead. That I think would be a decent balance here. Or again, then try and go for more what Jaws did, because even Jaws has moments of levity in it, like the drinking scene on the Orca, where it's like they're singing, they're joking, having a good time, and then it slows down for the famous Indianapolis speech, and then it gets a little funny again. It feels real, relatable, and then the horror of the shark interrupts the good time and turns it back into horror. Or go for something more along the lines of that. I think it would be a fair balance. Step 1. This would probably make the most difference right off the bat. More budget, at least enough to afford more convincing fake snow if and when it's needed. Special effects can benefit. Technology could allow for more complex puppeteering in scenes where Jack is in snow and ice forms. I'd only use CGI where it's necessary, mainly the larger scale effects that couldn't realistically be done practical. Step 2. Lean more faithfully into Cooney's originally darker horror thriller vision, and keep just enough of the humor that it can still function as a horror comedy too, but don't have the comedy dominate this time. Double, triple, and quadruple down on the horror, specifically as it relates to the Snowman motif. Step 3. Take more advantage of the psychological dread that can be built on the premise of being stalked by a killer you don't know is there watching you. I actually think this type of story would work better by taking a page from 2008's The Strangers, and especially The Invisible Man, specifically the way 2000's Hollow Man and 2020's Invisible Man remake approached it. The greatest strength of those three films, to me, is the paranoia built up as the characters are stalked by their villains. That there are long stretches in these films, especially The Strangers and Invisible Man remake, where not much happens. The pacing at its best does this in a way where both the viewer and characters have time to breathe, and the suspense of waiting for something horrific can be milked with the tone and atmosphere building anticipation. The suspense is often what makes our skin crawl more so than the actual payoff, which, makes the payoff hit that much harder when done well. Well, that's what I would try to cultivate here for most of the first act. There should be well-paced stretches of character-focused screen time just to get to know the cast more, watch how they interact in their everyday small-town existence. We should feel like guests being invited into a window of their lives, both the main leads and supporting characters. Again, like the first act of Jaws, before the shark becomes the center of attention. Build our investment in the conflict by making us care about these townspeople, at least the main and supporting characters. At the same time, have Jack in the background for most of the first act as this sinister force of nature and science gone wrong, just lurking stealthily in the snow right outside these unsuspecting people's homes, or being out in the open under their noses. Jack's first antics as a snow creature, when he's just starting to learn to control his powers, can't do much with them yet, aside from moving himself around. I would have him always in a position at this point where he has to be careful and strategic, not getting more directly aggressive until later, when his abilities are more developed. This remake should illustrate his process, starting with more subtlety and then building to the over-the-top stuff toward the third act. For instance, one of his first attacks could be something as simple as using the environment to his advantage rather than attacking directly. He wouldn't even have a snowman body yet at this time. he can only move himself through the snow, and if he concentrates for a few seconds, he can freeze basic stuff like water. So you could show the snow moving wherever he's present, and it's so subtle that nobody would realistically notice it. As some of the stuff you might not catch on your first watch. Like, it goes without saying there'd be a lot more snow in this remake for him to blend into. That the mountain setting would showcase a heavy winter, beautiful snowy scenery and trees as Cooney envisioned, and what was typical to see in Fawnskin minus that one unlucky year during shooting. I definitely would not curse this town or county with the name of fucking Snowman. Just no. The snowstorm at the beginning on the road would play out similarly to the original, albeit not as goofy. You know, in the remake, though, all the guards in the prisoner transport would die in the crash, with Jack being the only survivor. That would work better to establish, you know, the mystery of what he's become. In the first, going into the second act, where the Agent Manners and his team are starting to track him down, that they wouldn't have any witnesses to go off of. If they'd have to just steady the evidence from the chemical truck that burst open. And I think that would just make the opening sequence a little tighter. We'd have a few days of milder snow after that, with some sunny, mostly cloudy overcast, but there would be another snowstorm by the finale. We'd see several snow people around throughout the town, you know, people getting in the festivities, but in multiple scenes during the first act before the plot really gets going, you'd notice at least some of these snow people changing position in the background, and in other movies that might be a continuity error. Here, it's intentional to imply when and where Jack's nearby, just testing how he can screw with people while still blending in, and how he can make someone who saw these snow people second-guess themselves until they start getting creeped out. We know it's Jack because the premise has already given that away, so this psychological horror builds our investment because we know his presence is there, but the characters don't. In those moments, but it would be ambiguous at first which snowman is just a snowman and which one is being controlled by Jack. Again, building the paranoia. He'd change into a wider variety of forms in this version, with the scale and complexity escalating over time.
Look, Ma! I'm a Picasso!
Now, the second act is where the horror elements would be strongest, when Jack's just started getting the hang of reconstructing, deconstructing, and reshaping himself. His default form is still the snowman, but he kills his first few victims using smaller, simpler forms and methods. Some deaths, as in the original, would look like accidents at first, but the crime scenes get stranger, more over-the-top and malicious as the remake goes on. And as Jack transitions from an invisible man kind of villain hiding in the snow to more stronger, directly aggressive forms, Jack takes his time sabotaging the town. Like Ben Foster's character in the first few minutes of 30 Days of Night, it's one task at a time. Jack freezes the phone lines, cell towers, satellite internet connection equipment, whatever Sam and Agent Manners could use to call reinforcements. You know, I'm not an electrician. Suffice it to say, whatever Jack needs to freeze and or break to cut the town off from outside communication, he gets it done. And he might call Sam at first at the police station, let's say, while he's putting his evidence together. He already thinks it's Jack, but again, he has no proof. Jack never had a traceable pattern to how he killed, even when he was human. So it's just Sam's instincts giving him a gut feeling, like he feels Jack's presence looming, but you know, not literally. And perfect timing, Jack's watching him from outside. This could be another background shot with a snowman staring at him from just behind a tree. And the sheriff gets a call with this distorted voice on the other end, and the phone signal's fuzzy. This happens a couple times until Sam would say 911 is not a prank call line, using this number to play games is a felony, etc. But before he hangs up, this choppy voice finally speaks. It sounds eerily familiar, and Jack whispers something like, "Sammy boy." This gives Sam goosebumps because that's what Jack called him the last time they met, and he swore revenge on the sheriff to his face. Jack hangs up before Sam can try to trace the call, and we see outside that the Snowman was holding a cell phone in one hand behind its back, and the other's holding a bloody, severed hand from whoever he killed. He kept the hand so the fingers would unlock the phone, I guess. Sam's the only one who gets this call. Well, he's the one who heard Jack's voice, and not long after, the phone lines start going dead. And he takes care of the vehicles, too. People would find their car's tires and all the spare tires in town slashed or stabbed. Even the ones at the local mechanic's garage. A lot of cars have their engines and batteries mysteriously frozen, even though the rest of the car is fine. And there would be some foreshadowing with the town mechanic for what happens at the end. There'd be a scene where Jack stalks the mechanic in the garage while he's working on a customer's truck. This would be the same model as the truck in the original that was filled with antifreeze. Jack's not a snowman here, just a small pile of snow moving across the garage floor. He gets ready to kill the mechanic while he's working, but the guy accidentally shocks his finger while connecting one of his tools or something. Maybe he has to jump-start the truck and zaps himself, catching some static, but a spark falls and connects with the snow that Jack's controlling, making it recoil in a yipe and back off. If the mechanic hears that and looks around, but Jack's already gone, so remember that detail for later. It would take 1 to 2 days to disable every car in town, though. Even a small town like this, Jack can't be everywhere at once. His control over the snow and ice has limited range. And he'd do all of that stuff and as far as taking care of the tires and cars and what have you, in the second act under cover of night, when most people would obviously be inside. You could have one character, maybe Sam's deputy, have the only car Jack didn't have a chance to hit yet. Sam orders him to go to the next town over for help, which would be a good ways away. All Jack has to do is think ahead and block the only roads out of the county with a bunch of snow. His powers would be strong enough by this point to do that. Do it like how the roads were blocked in the first act of Identity. But with snow, the deputy drives in both directions, but just can't get through. Then Jack could scare him with his snowman form on the road and kill him when he steps out to investigate. Simple. I'm not saying he should block the road with an avalanche. Let's not make him too OP, or that would raise the question of, well, if Jack can do all this, he could have just buried the town in snow. I wouldn't make him such a super villain that he's like demigod Sheen Estevez from Jimmy Neutron. And that was a good episode. So the town's basically cut off now like Perfection, Nevada.
The phone's out, the road's out, we're on our own.
Before that, let's say some kids are snowball fighting in a front yard. They're grabbing, throwing, and kicking up snow so they don't notice the portions of snow moving on its own. Jack would be hiding off to the side of the yard manipulating it while watching them play. So while they're preoccupied, we see Jack's power move through the snow to the driveway and slowly freeze the water and sleet on it into solid ice with some 1-inch hard ice spikes on the surface, and a couple kids get dangerously close to the driveway but don't step onto it, which annoys Jack after a couple failures a little. So he decides to scare one of them onto the ice. Now the music's really building this ominous anticipation until the closest kid to the driveway, he makes another snowball. He's ducking down behind his little snow fort, and right as he looks at his newest snowball, Jack's power makes a face appear on it. It looks friendly at first, a little smiley face. He's the kid's obviously in shock, like when Woody revealed his sentience to Sid in Toy Story. And this thing in his glove suddenly forms into a little snowman head with an evil face that looks like the lenticular cover, minus the yellow eyeballs, of course. It's just snow. But it snaps at him in a jump scare with more little snow heads then forming at his feet. So the other kids wouldn't see this because they're on the ground on the other side of his snow fort. So they notice something's off with their friend. He's staring at the ground, like he's seen a ghost. But these mini jacks are snapping at the boy's shoes, hurting him toward the driveway. The kid's trembling. He tries to call out for his mom, but he's so scared that his voice won't come out. It's like when Elliot's so scared his voice is strained, trying to call for help when he first meets E.T. So one of the boy's friends he was snowball fighting with isn't paying attention. He's focused on making some more snowballs. He's one of the shittier kids in the neighborhood. He just sees his friend wide open, yells out to him, and throws his snowball. He's aiming for his body. He's not a total dick, but the scared kid starts to panic. He looks up just in time to see that snowball hit him right square in the schnoz. He stumbles, slips on the driveway, falls on his back, finally lets out a scream, and splits the back of his skull open on those sharp, tiny ice spikes.
I didn't do it.
Holy moly, right? Kill Billy!
It wasn't me.
The other kids pause in shock. The boy's mom hears the noise, runs outside, and shrieks at the sight of her son on the pavement. She turns to his friends, going out of her mind, as you do, shouting something like, "What happened, my baby? What the fuck have you done?" She rushes toward his body. The now crying kids try to warn her about the driveway. She's not listening. She's an irrationally grief-stricken parent. She slips on the ice, bangs her head on a sharp corner of her car, and drops right next to her boy. The other kids run screaming for help. The mom can't move. She can only stare helplessly at the dead expression of her son, blood streaming out of both their heads down the driveway, which is now unfrozen like it was before, somehow. Wonder who did that. This whole sequence could be a perfect reference not only to the original VHS cover, with the little mini Jack faces, but also to Jack Frost 2's little snow minions. And so that they wouldn't play as much of a role here because I think that would eat up too much of the remake's runtime, and even in Jack Frost 2, they weren't really that much of a threat once the characters stopped panicking or were just being dumbasses and figured out how to fight them. And they were capable of killing people, certainly, but they were more of a joke than anything seriously deadly. Realistically, a grown adult could just kick them into powder and run away. So I wouldn't use them as much here, except primarily as a distraction or a scare tactic. I think this version would still have Jack use frozen minions to do his bidding. I'll go into more detail on that later. But the last thing this poor woman sees as she blacks out is a few of those little mini Jacks behind them giggling at her from the snow. This would be the first of, again, several deaths the police investigate that look like accidents at first, but Jack deliberately leaves certain details at each crime scene that just don't add up. Like, how did these two people slip and fall on a driveway that's no longer frozen by the time the cops come to investigate? And it only gets stranger from there. Jack would treat this whole thing like a game between him and Sam, a chessboard where he controls every piece. He wants Sam to feel incompetent and powerless, for his town to lose faith in him, and Sam to lose whatever faith he has in himself. Jack has multiple opportunities to kill Sam, including in the original, but his arrogance and bloodlust combined with the rush of these new abilities compel him to drag the game out. He doesn't see Sam as a threat at all. He's his entertainment and his prey. And again, this proves to be his fatal mistake in the end. And I would try to play up the unwanted hero worship towards Sam a little bit more too, because in the original it's kind of funny. Even after he catches a serial killer, however lucky he was to do it, most of the people in his town, at least the adults, it's most people outside of his family, they don't show much respect toward him at all. They actually treat him like the butt of the joke. And Jill's dad, this really just cartoonishly angry, religious hypocrite. It's and of course he's probably a drunk too. I mean, he just fits that stereotype to a T. He yells at Sam's face. at least, threatens to punch him. And, granted that when he does this, it's after, Jack killed his son and he's angry. Yeah, but it's still taken just to such a degree that he's that character in every horror movie that you just hope he dies. At least, which he does later on, but maybe he play that down a little bit and go in the opposite direction to where people in Snowman, and again, this would not be Snowman and the name in the remake. They just they make Sam a little uncomfortable at points with how loyal and appreciative and at times seems the admiration they show him. Because again, he and Jack are the only ones who know that he's not the man and people think he is exactly, and he doesn't feel that he deserves this attention. But if you have the town treat him like less of a joke and more like their leader figure, the person they look to in times of crisis, said that would make the payoff more compelling. When he earns that hero status in the end. And, I keep going back to this. Chief Brody in Jaws was like the new kid in town since it was his first summer at being police chief at Amity Island. And there are characters in the movie like the mayor who don't really respect him because he's not an islander, he's kind of an outsider. But even still, there are numerous characters in the town who respect him and ask him to help them out, look to him as the authority figure. So make Sam in the remake closer to Martin Brody and less like Barney Fife. The Snowman would be set up with similar suspense, like picture a sweet old grandmother, maybe Jill's widowed granny, making hot cocoa in the evening at home. We'd have an earlier interaction establishing her relationship to the remake's version of Jill, including dialogue mentioning that she loves Christmas but hates winter, and is looking forward to visiting her sister in Miami or something, like she does every year. She gives Jill a kiss goodbye, says she's leaving tomorrow, and Jill can use the house while she's gone if she wants. She knows about her boyfriend, she's a cool granny. And a granny could be portrayed as almost like a rebellious influence on Jill. Like they're both rebels, so maybe that's where she gets it from. And she understands that, kids are going to do what they do. But of course she'd encourage Jill and Tommy to be safe. And, she's a cool granny. She's not a fucking idiot. And, she could tell her something like, whatever you do, you kids better be safe. You don't want to end up like an accident like your mother was. That would make more sense to me than her and Tommy. I get that they're supposed to be like, going for some rebellious, this would be so hot if we did this kind of thing. But going to her grandmother's house while it's empty would make a hell of a lot more sense to me than her basically dragging Tommy to sneak in to have sex at the sheriff's house. Like even in the original, that comes off less sexy, rebellious, and more like, oh, you're an actual crazy bitch who's looking to get us freaking arrested. I mean, it's not like in American Horror Story Asylum where like you have those two characters who I forget their names. They're like doing this little sexcapade where they screw around in famously haunted locations or something, and they keep doing that until Bloody Face or whatever his name was actually he comes and kills them, and it's like the sexcapade comes back to bite him in the ass. I haven't watched American Horror Story Asylum in years, but I do remember that little bit. But just this feels a little too nonsensical, sneaking into the sheriff's house, even when you use the logic of American Horror Story Asylum. Just Tommy, I get it, but I mean, how good is she? Like, is this worth it, dude?
Oh my God!
Again, there'd still be comedy in this movie. It's just darker, scarier. This Jack would be more like Freddy Krueger was in the original Nightmare on Elm Street, where he had a sick sense of humor, and he said a few one-liners, but he hadn't taken it to the level of being a clown yet, like in the later sequels.
Now I'm playing with power!
So that evening, Granny's just about finished packing and takes a break to make some hot cocoa with holiday music playing on a vinyl record. This would be a long one-shot take following her around her house with a snowman appearing in the background outside her window. It's far away at first, but gets closer each time we see it. There's no suspenseful music this time, just the Christmas music playing with Granny going about her business. She gets her cocoa, walks back to her living room to sit, and that's when the camera reveals in a quick turn the remake's version of the snowman design from the original. He's right outside Granny's glass screen back door. We don't need any jump scare music, like no loud musical boom or sting, whatever, or her startled scream would be enough. She flinches, cocoa spills all over the rug, the mug shatters. Granny catches her breath looking at the snowman with its sinister grin, and she says something like, "Damn kids," and she grumbles to herself as she goes to the door. Why can't they just entertain themselves with porn like normal brats? Fucking slow-ass country internet. Nobody their age reads fucking Playboy anymore, damn it. So Granny closes the screen door curtains over the snowman, leaves in a huff to get her broom and dustpan to clean up, and when she comes back, we can see through the curtains even though it's kind of blurry. The snowman is gone. Yeah, this would be when the tone gets creepier. She opens the curtains, checks outside really quick, yells out something like, "Okay, you little shits better fuck off before I get my hunting rifle," while holding her broom like a gun. And that nobody's gonna put an old lady with bad eyesight in jail if I just say I thought you were a deer. Or it worked for Cheney, you bet your ass it'll work for me.
Social commentary.
Yeah, she doesn't see anything in the yard, just snow and trees. Then the Christmas music in her house changes. This would be a lot like in The Strangers, where Liv Tyler's freaking out and the record's just skipping on a loop, adding intensity to the tone of the situation. Except here, the killer is the one who changes the record. And Granny's really unnerved now. It's too cold out with what she's wearing to stay outside, though, so she goes back in, gets her rifle, looks around the house, says she's smart to check behind doors, under beds, around corners, in the closets, but she can't find anyone, and she ends up in her bathroom, the last place she checks being, with a lot of suspense build up behind her shower curtain. And she takes the rifle barrel and pulls the curtain back with that. And right when she sighs in relief, thinking the wind outside must have just knocked the snowman over and covered it in snow, finally, the snowman appears in her bathroom doorway behind her, and Jack says, "Oh, Granny, what a big mouth you have." Yeah, but the lights and heat would be on in the house, but Jack's solid enough now, after, practicing with his powers, is that he can stay in a moderately warm room for a few minutes before he starts to melt. We could see him sweating maybe a bit, but not much. Granny screams, seems instantly, who blasts a hole in him with the rifle. Maybe a nice little see-through shot, like when, Quentin Tarantino, who does that effect of looking through the hole in his hand at George Clooney in From Dusk Till Dawn. And, this is with snow, of course. But Jack's unfazed. So the next thing she goes for is her hairdryer, one of a couple things she conveniently hadn't packed yet. You can allow for a little plot convenience here and there, or if it makes sense to the situation, and this would be the callback to when they start pressuring Jack with blow dryers in the original, but Jack's smart enough this time that the heat would only hold him back until he does what he should have done in the first movie. He could just freeze the plug and it's solid until it stops working. He wouldn't need to unplug or cut it. Just use your ice powers to freeze the dryer. I mean, I'm no electrician. Feel free to fact check me. But those things would not melt a 7-foot snowman as fast as the original movie portrays. And those wires, I don't think that rubber or plastic insulation casing or the copper inside would hold up well against a, like, really cold temperature. You know, the guy controls ice. Go ahead and grab her hand holding the dryer and freeze the whole hand with it until her forearm breaks off. And before she can scream again, he grabs her throat with his other hand and slowly freezes her with the camera holding on a close-up of her face as her eyeballs and vocal cords freeze. Like, you can hear her voice just, like, going out, her skin crackling until she stops moving.
Sub-Zero wins. Fatality.
Step 4. More consistent writing and lore regarding Jack's limitations and vulnerabilities. That one shouldn't be difficult, provided, of course, you have writers with a few more fucks and willingness to give them. And granted, more time to think it through as well. You know, some writers do their best work under pressure. In my anecdotal experience, and most don't. Step 5. Expand Jack's powers more and let his abilities advance more quickly, starting small scale, like we've discussed, but building to disaster movie proportions by the finale. You know, I don't mean to the scale of a Roland Emmerich film. You know, the effects of Jack's rampage should stay isolated to the town. And, you know, we don't need him turning from a snowman into the new Ice Age storm, from spreading over the planet from the day after tomorrow. But you could do more with what he's already been portrayed to be capable of across the two existing films, as well as reimagining and recontextualizing how certain abilities function, again, more coherently. The way I'd articulate this is by, like I said, giving Jack more of an arc of learning to control his powers, similar to Thomas Hayden Church's Sandman from Raimi's Spider-Man 3. Start the transformation with him seemingly dead and melted to, like, almost nothing after the acid spill, except for his brain, and go all in with the body horror, of course, like very David Cronenberg or Saw 6 or Reanimator, or just really sell that effect of a body melting from acid. I thought of this after watching both versions of The Brain That Wouldn't Die, both quality movies, the classic and the remake. Specifically in regards to Jack's brain, his bloody, now pulsating brain and nervous system would be the only organic parts of him left, which of course bond into the snow. We see his brain and nerves sink into the snow with the acid, making them give off steam as the metamorphosis begins, but then they freeze rapidly and enter a sort of stasis. Not as quickly as Fry in Futurama, but the brain ends up buried in the snow. You know, maybe the wind blows some snow over it, the pulsing slowing down until you don't see any movement, and the storm buries it at least a couple feet deep, and it stays there, like, almost hibernating for maybe a day, no more than 2 days at the most, I think. We wouldn't want the authorities' response time to the crash to be implausibly slow. You know, even on a country road way out in the mountains, in a low-populated area, someone, I assume, would eventually come across the wreckage and report it. You know, however long it takes, the response time should ideally make sense with the classic trope of this town being pretty much in the middle of nowhere.
Well, of course. Stuff like this only happens in the middle of nowhere.
But the mutagen keeps the brain alive until, over time, it transforms into a whole new organ that becomes able to function without depending on oxygen or blood flow. Maybe it just absorbs oxygen from the surrounding water and air or something. It develops into a stronger version of a brain, growing about twice as large, I guess. The remaining nerves would assimilate into it, making it significantly more sensitive, but also more hyperactive with much stronger electrical signals. And as a primal, perhaps evolutionary response to the environment the brain found itself in, it adapts to the surrounding temperature and ice molecules. Also, you know, so of course with heightened nerve sensitivity wouldn't come, you know, being in constant agony from exposure to the cold. But it would basically adapt to the temperature and use the ice molecules to protect itself rather than reject them. It develops a limited telekinetic influence over this specific range of molecules that form the element of snow, ice, and later water to command and reshape them. It would basically be cryomancy, like what, again, Marvel's Iceman or DC's Killer Frost does. Mr. Freeze and Captain Cold are also iconic for doing that.
With science.
But Jack would only have a brain to control ice and snow instead of a full body or gadgets. So after some practice, his first accomplishment in this new form would be learning to move himself around by rolling a protective snowball around his brain and literally rolling himself through the woods, picking up more snow as the friction makes him lose control of some. He just follows the directions he remembers from last time he was here until he reaches Sam's town the following day. So as you can tell, there'd still be some humor. It's hardly much less ludicrous than the original. This would just provide a slightly more easily digestible, more tangible sci-fi explanation for how Jack's memories and personality remain intact. I wouldn't say there's a significant difference in silliness here, but I kind of like it, and it would serve as Jack's main weak point in this remake too. Any damage that the super brain takes causes him intense pain, stimulating his new super nerves, as they would have been when he suffered injury as a human, except because his brain is so much more sensitive now, the stimulation would be heightened to an excruciating degree every time. This would make more sense with why he's so sensitive to heat. His brain has adapted to the cold now, so any direct exposure to heat or even sunlight makes his brain boil like a vampire or a gremlin, that the ice becomes as much of a prison for him now as an asset, so when forced out of the ice, his brain's at its most vulnerable. His powers would weaken when he's hurt too, at least temporarily, forcing him to retreat until he recovers. He would regenerate though, even if you shot half his brain to mush, as the transformation would also accelerate his capacity and speed for replacing lost brain cells with new ones. The cell divisions are radically increased.
I'll be back when I pull myself together!
As long as enough brain tissue is intact, it can heal itself a near unlimited number of times, potentially. Just think of it like Wolverine's healing factor, or Jack Baker's from Resident Evil 7. And as Jack grows more powerful, he'd learn to harden the ice molecules around his brain, until that shell is so thick and strong that even guns can't easily break through it. That's how compact the molecules would get over time. It would act as a new skull, a protective casing, so the brain can safely continue mutating and exercising itself like a muscle as its telekinesis grows more advanced. Sam and other characters might wound Jack the first time they land a brain shot on him with, say, Sam's pistol, and his brain escapes into the snow before they can finish him. Like, the snowman just collapses and the brain tunnels into the snow like Bugs Bunny, just rolling away. But after a couple to a few regenerations, he'd gain so much more power and control over the ice that he just keeps hardening it until it would take a shotgun or high-caliber rifle to even make a dent. That ice would just keep hardening until it's almost like bulletproof armor under the snowy exterior. Or that would be what makes this new Jack more physically intimidating and durable than the original. Every time that he survives, his mental powers slowly evolve, which makes him tougher to kill. It would be a lot like how the superpowers in 2012's superhero film Chronicle progressed. Again, they kept working their brains like a muscle, and since Jack's brain is his weak point in this version, he could just move it around his snowy body when his telekinesis gets more advanced, so that you wouldn't even know where to aim just by looking at him. Conventional logic dictates that, you should go for the head, right? But when the characters shoot him, he could subvert expectations by laughing and showing how it was actually in his chest, shoulder, stomach. It would be a lot like when Kuwabara fights Elder Toguro in Yu Yu Hakusho's Dark Tournament Saga. Nerd! He's also a shapeshifter, so he looks like a person on the surface, but you can't visually tell where any of his vital organs are. It would be the same deal here with Jack's brain, and we see this progression throughout the story from when Jack can barely move himself and the soft snow around him at all, until by the third act he's so good at manipulating it that he forms an entire body that looks and moves like an uncanny valley, icy version of his human self. Again, basically a serial killer version of X-Men's Iceman, and he holds the snow together like how Sandman does with his grains of sand until he decides to shapeshift, while the icy Under Armour would become like, Wolverine's adamantium skeleton, and that's what he forms his ice-based weapons out of, through the snowy exterior. And you could do an on-the-nose Wolverine reference, but by having CGI Jack shapeshift to look like an ice version of Hugh Jackman and sprout ice claws out of his snow knuckles. He still has fun with his powers, even though his portrayal in this version is still a darker character by comparison. See, this is more the kind of horror I personally enjoy, is problem-solving horror, where the threat or obstacle of the story has a written-out, well-established, appropriately, organically discovered and or exposited weakness, and the characters have to survive long enough to solve the puzzle before ultimately conquering it. Again, perfect example, Tremors. That's a big reason why I love that first movie so much, that throughout the story, every obstacle the protagonists overcome as they figure out how the graboids work is an exercise in surviving smarter, not just harder. That's the kind of mentality I would want in a Jack Frost remake. I think that the only instance in Tremors where any of the characters brute force their way through a problem would probably be Bert and Heather when that graboid breaks into the wrong rec room and we get that glorious no-holds-barred shootout of them grabbing stuff off that gun wall with every kind of gun you can imagine and just throwing almost everything they have plus the kitchen sink at this thing. But that still made sense and was earned because the story established and built up what a survivalist power couple Bert and Heather were, that the shootout was the payoff to that build-up. And even then, it also works to demonstrate how tough these things are and why it's not really a practical option to battle them head-on. We see them take so much punishment when the characters try to fight back that it reinforces the danger. And even with all that ammo, if it wasn't for Bert and Heather working so well together, like either one of them still could have easily been killed in that scene had the other not been there to back them up with a clear sense of training and not panicking under pressure. It's a masterfully shot and choreographed sequence of two characters that, when their big moment comes, were treated to this seamless teamwork between them, subverting the typical monster movie formula with these capable badasses just overwhelming the creature. Though the writing is careful to immediately illustrate afterwards why they can't just mow the other graboids down, the third act doesn't take the easy way out by having them roll in and just save the day. So again, that's the kind of smart writing I would shoot for here. Now, Jack's first major shapeshift after the basic Snowman could be inspired from a beautiful ice sculpture he sees in the first act while sneaking around town, something made for their annual contest like in the original, only the remake would change it to an ice sculpture competition, and the character who carved this one could be Tommy, who surprises his girlfriend with it, showing that he modeled it off of her. She would be the remake's version of Jill, so Jack would reference that sculpture as a callback at least once after his killing spree starts. The first time I'd have him do it during the second act when Tommy and Jill will go to her granny's house for a little date night. They'll drink, be merry, take off layers, and get ready to make some snow angels, and Tommy would bring the ice sculpting saw with him, which it turns out was lent to him by Jill's grandmother. We could get some exposition in an earlier scene that she did it when she was younger and less arthritic. That could be one reason she liked Tommy, because he shared her passion for it and maybe she instructed him a little. You would see the sculpture he made of Jill.
And, Granny reviews it before she sees it and tells him, congratulations, kid, you were my best student. She's gonna love it. So back to this scene, just like in the original, Jill wants to warm up first with a hot bath. She prefers baths to showers, and there wouldn't be enough room for both of them in the shower anyway. It's like one of those smaller, old-school ones. So Tommy waits for her downstairs, looking forward to their romantic evening, and Jack interrupts, luring him to the door. Maybe he does the whole ding-dong ditch routine a couple times, and in this version, the default Snowman wouldn't be the form Tommy meets, though. It could start with a funny fake-out where the suspense builds each time Tommy answers the door until suddenly, rule of three, mini Jack with a child-sized body is standing there like, Daddy! Tommy screams and kicks the little shit's head off before locking the door. That would work as a setup for Jack's iconic line. Tommy says, like, what the fuck is that? Then Jack breaks through the door and says...
Well, it ain't fucking Frosty!
Yeah, but in this version, he shows up looking like a walking, talking snow version of Jill. Maybe he initially flirts with Tommy just to screw with him. The sound of the door breaking down wouldn't alert any neighbors, by the way, because Granny's place would be a little further away from the other houses in town. Again, convenience, but a permittable one. Tommy grabs the ice saw to fight back this time instead of that little ice pick or screwdriver or whatever it was in the original that Jack just laughed off. With the saw, Tommy puts up more of a fight this time and manages to sever Jack's arm when he comes at him with an icicle blade the first time.
Dude, I got an arm!
All right, yes!
Jill's upstairs in the bathroom listening to music at a loud volume on her phone or something while this happens. You could cut to that and then back downstairs for a little levity. So Jack would be in a bit of trouble here since his powers at this point in the story are too weak to stand up to that saw. He can't harden his ice enough against it yet. But just when it looks like Tommy's getting the upper hand and is about to run upstairs to warn Jill, Jack switches tactics by shape-shifting from snow to now perfectly mimic Tommy's ice sculpture. He hardens just enough to make his body icy on the surface. It's still brittle, but it looks like an icy CGI Jill. You could do a lot with today's motion capture and deepfake technology for that. Make it look like at least semi-realistic ice, but also creepy. Just a more advanced, solid version of the digital water face effects from The Abyss. Jack then reveals yet another new trick, that he can imitate sound from anything or anyone he hears. Yes, he can hear without eardrums, just go with it. It's another trait of his mutated super brain. I didn't think of everything, okay? I only have like 2 weeks to write these scripts. I'm open to suggestions, but he'd use this trick multiple times to lure victims into traps. He might try that on Sam at one point by like imitating the voice of his son or wife or whatever. Or his brain just projects whatever voice it's thinking of, so he's not talking psychically in people's heads, but he does sound echoey and kind of ghostly, similar to how they edited Scott's voice in the original. So using Jill's voice, he plays on the already disturbed Tommy's feelings for Jill by pretending to be in pain from his severed arm. Tommy obviously can't understand any of this. He thinks it must be a nightmare, or maybe he and Jill drank too much, and Jack just torments the poor kid, crying, Tommy, why? Why are you hurting me? I thought we loved each other. Tommy might try to say, you're not Jill, but Jack just keeps going. You're the only one who makes me happy, don't you? Am I not good enough? Am I not pretty like her? You poured your heart into making me, didn't you? You put all your love into making me. Oh, Tommy, don't you love me anymore? Treat it like Bride of Reanimator when Gloria tries to seduce Dan, only this would all be an act for Jack to scare Tommy. Just shits and giggles like how Evil Dead's Deadites just love psychologically tormenting their victims. So Tommy freaks out and turns to run upstairs, but upon entering the living room, which he and Jill weren't in before, they were in the kitchen the whole time,
He sees what looks like the shadowy silhouette of her granny, only to turn the light on and see that it's her frozen one-armed corpse. And the layout of the house would be sure to be designed in a way that this makes sense, to where, or, Jill wouldn't need to go through the living room to go upstairs, and she just, walk past without even seeing her granny's body. But by the time Tommy turns around, Jack pins him to the wall with icicles, much like how he pinned him to the door in the original. He might not be strong enough to fire icicle projectiles yet, but he could run up and pin him like the T-1000 did to Sarah Connor.
Well, what do you know? Armed and dangerous.
And to rub salt in the wound, he shapeshifts again, changing his Jill face to where it still looks like her, but the jaw unhinges like Megan Fox in Jennifer's body, and it's multiple rows of icicle teeth that chew Tommy's face off. Just a gorier, higher budget homage to what he does to Agent Manners in the original film. I don't know for sure off the top of my head how the real Jill would die in this version. I mean, it's a given it wouldn't be another Snowman assault. But there are several snow and ice themed options you could use here. Maybe Jack freezes her to death while she's relaxed with her eyes closed in the tub. She calls out to Tommy after hearing Jack approach the door, but he doesn't answer, and she flirts with who she thinks is her boyfriend, like, just let me soak a little longer, baby. You'll get to open your present soon. You can show her naked or don't. It's an R rating, but you could subvert expectations by having Jack turn back to powdery snow and slowly move it under the bathroom door. He's very quiet since snow that soft and slow wouldn't make any noise, and her music's still playing anyway. Plus, while she's soaking and relaxing, her eyes would be closed. His brain would stay on the other side of the door in its protective ice casing. The snow climbs its way into the now lukewarm tub water little by little. Well, it would be cool enough now that Jack would be able to tolerate it. While Jill's eyes are still closed, you could maybe have Jack do a Freddy Krueger reference if you want, where the snow forms itself into a wet, snowy hand with sharp ice fingers between Jill's legs, but it's a fake out and he goes back under the water. So you think what's coming next is that infamous scene. Jill would mutter to herself like in the original that the water's getting cold, so she lifts her hand about to reach for the faucet, and right then the water's surface freezes solid super fast. She doesn't have time to get out or process what's happening before the whole tub's surface of the water starts freezing over. Jack traps her under the frozen surface as she screams. Like, this would be another reference to Jack Frost 2, when he traps a woman underwater in a swimming pool by freezing the water's surface. This bathtub would have to be big enough for Jill's whole body to fit, of course, so she's trapped under the ice. Her limbs don't have room to move or try to break it. The ice hardens too fast, and Jack holds her underwater, manipulating the molecules to make it colder and colder, and he lets Jill suffer from drowning for a few seconds, but not long enough for her to die and go limp. She opens her mouth to scream one last time with those air bubbles, and that's what Jack was waiting for. It's perfectly timed. With that last agonized scream, his brain projects the sound of him laughing, and it freezes all the water solid at that moment, super fast, like liquid nitrogen temperature. Think of Danica's death freezing solid in Saw 3, but if she froze as quickly as Adrian in Jason X. The sheriff could find Jill's body the next morning as neighbors are screaming and crying at the sight of it. Sam makes his way over and sees her frozen corpse posed or maybe encased in a big tub-shaped popsicle. Either way, she's displayed in the front yard for everyone to see with a frozen expression of that last moment of mortal terror on her face, but maybe exaggerated like the faces of Samar's victims in The Ring. Yeah, really make it a creepy image. Her parents and little brother see this and freak out. Not to worry, they'll join her later. Sam and a couple other people try to move Jill or break her out, and she just shatters to pieces. It was so cold that she froze solid down to her blood, tissue, and bones. And all that's left intact is her distorted face sitting atop the pile of her now fragmented head.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, this is the kind of shit I think about sometimes, and that goes back way before this podcast. If you listen to my childhood trauma episode, I guess that's not surprising. I've always had an active imagination. You could bounce off lots of ideas for how the remake's Jack kills people with more of an effects budget. Again, Cooney had numerous ideas that didn't even make it far enough to be left on the cutting room floor. So fast forward to the third act when Sam and his allies get together to fight Jack. He's frozen the electrical grid's machinery by this point, so there's no more heat or electricity. All the survivors have left to keep warm apart from their clothes is fire. So after Sam and Agent Manners gather all the remaining people, and including Sam's family, into the strongest building in town, the old church, they're ordered to stay in there and keep a big fire going, but a few brave individuals volunteer to help Sam and Agent Manners kill Jack. This posse quickly scrounge up some Molotov cocktails, improvised explosives the scientist knows how to make with household chemicals, which he shows to the less scientifically minded characters. They even cobble together a realistic improvised flamethrower.
Oh, that's hot.
This is such a normally peaceful little town. They have no SWAT unit or riot equipment, so this is kind of the best they can do under the circumstances. So Sam and the group set up a trap at the town morgue where all the victims' bodies have been examined up until, of course, the mortician was killed. Jack takes the bait but gets the drop on them with an ambush. He kicks everyone's ass in his more humanoid ice form for a couple minutes. They're moving too fast for him to catch and freeze them solid. Maybe a couple characters are grabbed by him for a few seconds and get a little frostbite on their skin, but even with his super fast freezing, he still has to get a good hold of someone in order for the freezing temperature to go deep enough. If he was able to do that to Jill because he had enough time to build up the cold in the water first. So everyone's not dead yet, but he very much dominates the first half of the fight and kills at least one of the unimportant members in the group very quickly. He shrugs off shotgun blasts. His ice is too thick for fire alone to do much against him now. It causes him a little discomfort, but not a lot. And he's so much faster and more agile now that not all those Molotovs would even hit him. You could have a friendly fire moment if you want, where one of the Molotovs hits someone by accident and Jack laughs as he or she burns to death. He's mostly just showing off right now, and I guess he could say one pun, like, "Hot damn, have I missed you, Sammy boy." Sam recognizes his face and confirms that was his voice over the phone. He might try shooting Jack in every area he can get to, with him moving around hoping to hit the brain, but his clip and chamber empty right before finding the right spot, as Jack would point out before laughing and knocking him around before he can reload, just taking his time with him. Again, he underestimates Sam. The power makes him cocky and progressively reckless. Now, being hit hard by snow that's tightly compacted together is painful, right? So now add these thick, icy bones. You just hurt yourself if you punch or kick Jack the way he is now. These people might hit him with a crowbar, axe, or machete, backup weapons, and the ice might crack, but he just re-hardens it and can push the weapons out of him like a splinter.
Gosh, I only axed you for a smoke.
Unless it's a brain shot, he won't feel anything. He just laugh it off, and anyone who's ever been hit by hail or a slush ball with ice in it knows that when Jack hits back, that icy skeleton plus compacted snow would make his hand-to-hand blows do some serious damage against normal exposed flesh and bone. Again, look how well that went for the guy in 2000's first X-Men film, who got knocked out by Logan in their cage fight.
I didn't sign up for a cage match!
The feeling of having a superpowered mind is intoxicating for Jack. No mechanical canine, though, unfortunately. He doesn't kill Sam yet, though. That wouldn't satisfy him. This whole thing is about wanting him to suffer, maybe stabbing him with an icicle or two in non-vital spots, or stepping on his ankle and starting to freeze it. He just relishes watching Sam squirm. Agent Manners would save him, though, and in the original, this guy basically fills the role of the action hero man's man archetype for most of the story. He's the Han Solo to Sam's Luke Skywalker in A New Hope. Sam's more of the everyman audience character, just kind of a meek one. And I would retain that dynamic here until the third act, but I definitely wouldn't portray him to be as much of a dork as Chris Allport was directed to in the original, and especially the sequel. So Sam recovers as Agent Manners comes in with the flamethrower to start forcing Jack back. They didn't use it right away only because, being an improvised version, realistically it might struggle to work at first. I know, convenient, but that can happen. It's not a professionally made military one. So Sam, his surviving friends, and the scientist all help now, with a few more Molotovs and explosives, but the flamethrower does most of the work. Jack's starting to melt now. His brain still has ice around it, but it's weakening from the agony of that heat. They corner him into their trap now, except it's not a furnace this time. It's a tub filled with antifreeze. Another callback. And right as Jack looks at the antifreeze containers in the corner of the room, which, lets the audience see what that stuff is, Sam and Agent Manners could shoot him simultaneously in the head or something, knocking him into the tub. They assume the chemicals will keep him down long enough for them to contain all the liquid. Jack's brain is seething in pain now, with his ice shell being all that's left in the tub. It sinks to the bottom, and the ice is thinning fast, so Sam reloads his pistol, about to shoot through what's left of the shell and finish the job, but this is the moment when Jack's powers evolve again, and he's so pissed that he gains the ability to move water molecules in addition to ice. He's not just freezing and unfreezing water now, he totally controls the molecules. The brain roars in anger from inside what's left of its shell, telekinetically forcing the antifreeze up out of the tub, causing Sam's gunfire to miss. The liquid spills all over the floor. Some characters could get it all over them. Sam and Agent Manners would cover their eyes, after which the water under Jack's control separates from the antifreeze, moves across the floor like Final Destination, actually climbs up the pants of the scientist and Sam's remaining friends. He and Agent Manners get out of the room quickly enough to avoid it. Those that don't, the water gets into their mouths, eyes, every orifice, and Jack's brain, having rolled its shell out of the room away from the antifreeze, extends its control by using that water inside his new victims to gradually freeze them solid from the inside out. Very painful, a much worse fate than when Jack goes into the scientist's body in the original. The cold overpowers their core temperatures. Sam and Agent Manners shoot at the brain, but it moves these people in front of their shots like human shields.
Don't eat yellow snow.
Sam's friends beg him to kill them, but it's too late. They turn into frozen meat puppets, who Jack then has attack them. It's not bloodbending, technically, like in Avatar: The Last Airbender. He's manipulating their bodies by moving the ice, like how Magneto could move or immobilize Wolverine by controlling his metal bones, or that prison guard in X2 who had excess iron in his blood. It's the same basic principle here, but with ice. Jack makes things worse by moving more of his water into the corpses of past victims that were being autopsied and processed at the morgue. Everyone who's died so far is frozen and becomes another meat puppet, of a very on-the-nose Game of Thrones reference, and they'd have that creepy body language with their bones and joints crackling. from being forced to move after rigor mortis, very much like Kayako from The Grudge. Sam and Agent Manners only have a couple Molotovs left to burn some of these White Walkers, but there are too many, and we see more evil mini-Jacks come in from the outside snow to join them. The flamethrower's out of fuel, it's not looking good. Jack's laughing from behind the crowd as his ice shell reforms. His little army keeps increasing, and Agent Manners sees only one option, so he pushes Sam back to the door, tells him to run. He throws his last Molotov at the nearby boiler in the building, right as one of the meat puppets bites into him. You think he missed his target. He only has his pistol left with one bullet, but he struggles to aim at the boiler. Jack's like, uh-oh, and has one of his frozen minions throw him at a window. Agent Manners pulls the trigger as the White Walkers are tearing into him, manages to hit the boiler covered in flammable chemicals from one of the Molotovs that got thrown around. Jack's brain shouts from inside his ice ball, "Oh shit!" as it hits the window glass, and boom, Sam watches from just outside as the morgue explodes. Is that scientifically accurate? Don't know, and at this point, don't care. They did a boiler explosion in Silent Hill and The Shining's original novel. We're doing it here. Step 6. Okay, so let's start winding down to the end here.
Finally.
This all speaks to my last suggestion for a hypothetical Jack Frost remake. Just go all in with most of Cooney's original ideas. It shouldn't be over-bloated, but build enough of the horror with this villain's powers that it earns a bombastic finale. Have more kills, more gore, more overall stakes. You know, for such an overpowered character, and in the original film, Jack's on-screen body count is fairly small. He's established to have killed at least 38 people in the opening narration when he was human, and yet after all the build-up and his promise of revenge, he only bodies 10 new victims in the first film, if James A. Janice's kill count is right. An estimated 33 died in the sequel. We could find some middle ground here in a remake. Jack should leave more of an impact on the town and survivors. The story should have us on the edge of our seat, with Sam as the unlikely hero toward the end, like Chief Brody in the finale of Jaws. Take all that suspense, adrenaline, and go out with a bang. Like, we should be rooting with every fiber of our being for this character that maybe nobody expected to survive this long, to earn that final girl status. So Sam's knocked over by the explosion, and he gets up to see what's left of the morgue on fire. It looks like it's over. Sam's hurt, but otherwise okay. Maybe he's limping a little bit from that mild frostbite from when Jack stepped on his ankle. He's not going to end up like Adam Sandler in Mr. Deeds. It's snowing now, just a nice picturesque snowfall. The people in the church think it's over, that there's no way anything could have survived that. They open the front double doors of the church and start to step outside. Sam looks at his family in the crowd and is about to walk toward them with a smile, but then the burning rubble starts moving. The snowfall's gradually getting heavier and more violent. Everyone hears Jack's projected laughter echoing all around, being carried on the wind, and the townspeople plus Sam watch in disbelief as something big starts rising from underneath the debris. A 25-foot-tall snowman body struggles to its feet, knocking bits of rubble away from it. Jack laughs even louder, his mental power manipulating the snow, ice, and water in the air until it starts swirling into a blizzard. And it turns out, Jack was building this up ever since the first act. Like, from the moment his telekinesis developed, he was very slowly extending his energy, or whatever you want to call it, into the water molecules in the air. As he couldn't do it at first, obviously. He needed a lot of practice and I guess evolution too, for his control to enhance itself. But this is what his grand finale was always going to be. To just keep getting more powerful until he could manipulate the water and the weather itself, and just leave the town a frozen wasteland by the time he was done. If you like one-liners, Jack could say something like, how's this for a brainstorm? And just when you think it can't get worse, he shapeshifts his mega snowman into the even larger Jackzilla. So this was something Cooney planned early on for the original's finale, which was supposed to move from the town into a city. He envisioned this snow beast trapping the heroes in a skyscraper where they destroy him in an over-the-top finale, I'm assuming an explosion of some kind. Cooney tried to bring that idea into what would have been Jack Frost 3, but that project was dead on arrival after the more negative response to the second film. He tried, but it never got off the ground. So this would be the culmination of Cooney's vision for that. I wouldn't call him Jackzilla in the movie, though. Maybe he could do the Godzilla roar, like his brain projects the sound out of the giant's mouth. I wouldn't make him grow to skyscraper size. That's too much. And it would be too derivative of Ghostbusters' Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, I think. My version would be a wicked, corrupted-looking snow angel who's taller than any of the town's buildings, but no taller than about maybe 50 feet. It would be a mix of a curvy snow angel body with monstrous features, icy claws, pointy icicle wings, and the Jill face from the ice sculpture with icy fangs that shifts back and forth to Jack's face as he taunts Sam. Music from Attack of the 50-Foot Woman could play as he tears through small buildings and houses. He can't fly with the wings, but his telekinesis would be so overpowered now that he can levitate that huge body like how he's manipulating the ice and snow in the air.
I can see your house from up here!
Maybe he starts forming human-sized snow angels that swoop down from the sky to attack Sam. By the finale, Jack would be so powerful and durable that there's virtually no chance of fighting him head-on unless you had like a tank or a rocket launcher, neither of which are available here, sadly. Jack's brain has too many layers of ice protecting it now. It would be as futile as Bert and Heather trying to shoot the graboids and tremors through all those layers of dirt when they're underground.
You didn't get penetration even with the elephant gun.
Shit!
So there's nothing powerful enough here that would even hurt the brain with heat now. The blizzard has the people in the church trapped. It's circling the town like a miniature hurricane of snow and ice, and the air in the center of the storm slowly gets colder and colder, very much like the day after tomorrow. A lot of people, including Anne and Ryan, are watching the mayhem outside through the church's windows, but it's getting so cold that the stained glass is starting to freeze over. Obviously, if that breaks, they're dead. The temperature inside is dropping, and everyone's throwing whatever they can on the fire to keep it burning, but it's still getting smaller. Jack could break into the church if he wanted, but Sam gets his attention with the last of his gunfire, knowing he's the one Jack wants most. He's so high on his own power at this point that it's just tunnel vision. That's the only drawback to this heightened brain activity, is how it affects what little rational functions Jack had to begin with. So it's all down to Sam. The Snow Angel's aerial attacks combined with the cold are too much to endure. He's used all his ammo and runs to the nearest building he can barricade himself in, the auto garage. He lowers and locks the shutter doors as fast as he can. These would be old-school non-electrical garage doors with a chain on them that you open and close manually. He locks every entrance with only a couple to a few snow minions getting inside the building. He's locked himself in the garage area with all the tools and the truck that was still there unfinished, that the mechanic was working on, though he would be long dead by this point. He would be one of the frozen meat puppets that they fought at the morgue. Sam finds something to light a piece of wood on fire and it makes a torch, I guess, maybe a 2x4 wrapped with cloth and gasoline, or alcohol, lighter fluids, something. Jack can make duplicates of his icy humanoid version now, and the ones that got inside are just banging on the doors and walls, laughing and cursing at Sam, and that there are dozens of them surrounding the building outside too. Sam patches himself up as best he can, but he's still losing blood. The cold is making him weaker too. Ice is covering the outside of every building in town now, and one of the Jack minions inside looks at Sam's torch, saying something like, "Didn't Mommy and Daddy ever tell you, Sammy? You shouldn't play with fire." And the torch suddenly bursts into flames in Sam's face. The fire spreads unnaturally quick around the garage, trapping Sam where he is, and he pieces it together now with the snow minions laughing and nodding at him. Jack's brain is so strong that he has minimal control over fire now, just like Cooney's original idea, a serial killer with control over ice, water, and fire. Jack's brain power is at its apex. He hasn't mastered fire yet. It would take time, just like it did for him to practice with ice and water. But Sam understands now that as long as Jack lives, he'll just keep growing more powerful, but possibly exponentially, until he pretty much is demigod Sheen.
I control the wind, and I shall rain fire down from the heavens. Goodbye, Sheen the Overlord. Hello, Sheen the God!
And Jackzilla wastes no time. He manipulates the fire to spread it around until Sam's choking on the smoke inside. He taunts, "Aw, what's the matter, Goldilocks? First it's too cold, now it's too hot. Here, let me lend a hand." And he digs his giant ice claws into the fucking roof, tearing a big-ass hole in the ceiling. I think that this would be a nice use of color, I think, juxtaposing the blues and grays of the snow raging above through the now torn open roof, with the bright reds and oranges of the fire on the floor inside the garage. Jack says, "Just right," and has Sam officially cornered. He breaks the doors down for his icy humanoid Jack minions to flood in, and they cut Sam down inch by inch with ice blades while beating him up and throwing him against the truck in the garage area until he's bloody on the floor. They have him surrounded, and the closest one kneels down over Sam as he's writhing. Jack is savoring this. He leans in real close, monologuing, "Oh, Sammy boy, this little dance has been fun, and I have so enjoyed leading. You know, buddy, I've imagined this moment for a long time, run every humanly possible scenario through my head, but now that I'm so much more than human, well, I simply cannot fucking decide." Maybe you can help me out, so...
Again. Say again. I dare you. I double dare you, motherfucker. Say one more goddamn time.
Answer me this one itty-bitty question. Which would hurt more, huh? If I made you watch as I froze your wife and brat into a couple of minute toys and had them eat you alive? Or if I froze you solid and made you chop up your family with your own hands? Come on, Sammy, before you bleed out and the choice is made for you. And that is the last straw. Sam gets angry thinking about Anne and Ryan, who we see are now huddled near that dying fire in the freezing church, its windows about ready to bust. He responds by growling something like, "I'll die before I ever let you touch them." He quickly pulls the last thing he has to defend himself out of his pocket, something he didn't think would do any good against a monster made of ice and snow. His little standard issue police stun gun. He shoves it right into the humanoid Jack's icy face, the one standing over him, and Jack cries out as this small current of electricity then arcs between all the Jack minions until it reaches Jackzilla like a small bolt of lightning, and the army of Jacks shatter into brittle ice shards. Jackzilla roars, the brain inside losing control as it falls apart until only the Jackzilla head and maybe one arm remain. Sam is confused, struggling to his feet, looks at his stun gun, which is now blackened at the tip beyond repair, and he sees that, of all the things Jack's brain is sensitive to, its worst vulnerability this whole time has been electricity. This mutated brain is essentially a living battery. Its telekinesis is fueled by the vastly increased electrical signals pumping through those supercharged neurons. Jack was so elated with all of this power that he never considered how the stronger his brain got, the more of this mental electricity he was giving off. Every molecule in the elements, even the water and the air, that he extended his control over are connected to the brain like a network of electrical signals in a hive mind. Therefore, by that logic, if a foreign current of electricity disrupts the current flowing through the superbrain, or anything it's controlling, Jack feels that shit like the world's worst migraine amplified times 1,000. Sam doesn't quite understand all of this. Again, he's not a scientist, but he does know exactly what happens when you overload a battery. So while Jackzilla is weakened and unable to make more snow minions, Sam drags himself over to get some jumper cables. He's very weak now, but moving as fast as he can. He hooks them up to a generator or another battery, I guess. Maybe he hotwires the truck and uses the battery in its engine or something. It would be something that makes sense to be in an auto garage that would let you put some shock into jumper cables. Ideally, it would be foreshadowed earlier when we saw the mechanic working, maybe something we saw in the background on one of the shelves. This would not be a last-minute ass-pull ex machina with no setup, I promise you that. In any case, Sam hooks the cables up, the cold has made it so it takes a couple to a few tries to build the suspense. Again, like Jaws. Jackzilla's recovering, he's dazed and still hurt. He's struggling to reform anything solid, but he's angry. So Sam's still trying. Will he make it? Jack finally gets enough snow and ice together to lunge at him. He's not even a snowman anymore, just a big pile of sentient snow and ice, and not an avalanche, because I think that would be disrespectful to Chris Allport's memory. This non-existent remake is dedicated to his memory. We are tasteful as we can be here at Horror Convos. So Jack roars, "You are so fucking dead!" He throws himself forward in a wall of ice that forms an evil face with a big, inhumanly wicked mouth, like Imhotep's sand wall from Brendan Fraser's Mummy remake. Sam gets that spark at the last moment, thrusts the cable right into the mouth of madness, music crescendos. The full shock hits Jack's superbrain, it screams and explodes in a splatter of ice and gore that sends Sam flying back into the garage wall shelves.
Blow me.
Ice and snow all around the epicenter of the shockwave as Jack's mental electricity spreads outward. The boom echoes like thunder, shaking snow off of the closest nearby trees outside. With Jack's power dissipated, the weather quickly clears. This is the first time in the movie that the sun completely comes out. The sunbeams shine down over the town. People start leaving the church as the outside warms up. Still a lot of snow in town, obviously, but no more from the clouds. People gather around the site of Jack's death, just a little pile of mutant, blood-stained snow. Sam is on the floor, or some feet away, with some shelving on top of him. Anne and Ryan call out until they see him under there. Multiple people help dig him out. They don't know if he's breathing. Again, a lot of blood loss, plus that explosion. Anne and Ryan are crying, but after an appropriate dramatic pause, Sam does come to. Yeah, happy tears now. Crisis over. Lots of men, women, and a couple children dead. Sam's family help him up. Hugging to a minimum. He's injured. Maybe they get electricity back in town. Finally get an ambulance with some snow plows to clear the roads. Nobody's going to believe a killer snowman story, of course, but Jack is gone. Jack was nimble. Jack was quick. Jack was also a total dick. Roll credits in memory of Chris Allport. No cliffhanger of, can Jack's powerful consciousness survive without his brain now? Did his mutant brain fluid or water molecules enter Sam's body, implying he'll take over his mind? Did his consciousness mix into the last of that snow falling onto everyone and he absorbs into their eyes and skin? No. N-O. Story's done. Sam and his family live happily ever after. Not everything needs a fucking sequel. And that is it for this episode of Horror Classics That Deserve a Remake. Comment below, what did you think of my ideas? Do you agree with my takes? Any suggestions of your own? What was your experience with these Jack Frost movies? Whatever your feelings, don't be shy. Remember, this is more than a podcast. It is a dialogue between horror fans. Once again, Horror Convos is available to listen to on YouTube, Google Podcast, and Apple Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss when new content is uploaded. Until we talk again, good night, be well, and happy holidays.